Something never left. The mistake, maybe, was thinking it had to. 200 beings came down onto a mountain, not alone, not gradually together, in a single movement. Iron that cuts, and a face that transforms side by side in the same lesson. No one asked if human hands were ready to hold that much power. They broke a guard they never held. What exactly did 200 beings decide to hand over, and to whom? What makes a guardian keep guarding, even after the border has already been crossed? That night, I wanted to know what was watching me. Today, I realize that was the wrong question.
Every threshold protects something.
And you are standing in front of it right now. Something never left.
Something never left. The mistake, maybe, was thinking it had to. The Book of Enoch describes beings who crossed a border. Egypt describes beings who stayed in front of it, questioning whoever approached. They are not the same figure. But placed side by side, the two texts open a single question, and it is not about angels, and it is not about giants. It is this: what exists at a threshold that needs a guardian? In the initiatory reading I'm proposing here, the tradition of Thoth would hand that question right back to whoever asked it, not with an answer, with another question. Are you already able to withstand what you'll find on the other side? I've carried that question since the first time I read chapter 6 of Enoch, the passage where the Watchers come down the mountain and seal the pact that changes everything after. I'll come back to that night later, because what I felt reading that text, I still can't quite name. Before I go on, a small pause. Notice your body without looking for anything in particular. Is there any pressure, any change in temperature, any weight or tension, anywhere at all? Don't try to explain it yet, just take note. This video isn't going to tell you who the Watchers were. It's going to do something harder, show you what their story still guards, and what it asks in return from whoever is listening. What exactly did 200 beings decide to hand over, and to whom? What makes a guardian keep guarding even after the border has already been crossed? And what do you do right now when something arrives before you're ready to carry it? To understand that, we need to go back to a mountain thousands of years ago, to the exact moment 200 beings decided to cross. Most people tell this myth as if it were simple. Angels fall in love with human women, get punished for it, the end. I'd rather start somewhere else, at exactly the part most people skip, the part that holds up everything that comes after. The crisis in the Book of the Watchers, chapters 1 through 36 of 1st Enoch, doesn't come down to the descent or the union with human women. That's only the visible surface. The text places something else at the center of the transgression, the handing over of knowledge, without preparation, without measure, without responsibility for whoever would have to carry it afterward. 200 heavenly beings come down onto Mount Hermon, not alone, not gradually, together in a single movement, and they make a pact among themselves before they even descend. The narrative frames the pact, the descent, and everything that follows as deliberate transgression. Nobody stumbles by accident into a border like that. What comes next is specific, almost technical. The text names who teaches what, like an inventory. Azazel teaches the metalworking of weapons and the making of cosmetics, iron that cuts and a face that transforms, side by side, in the same lesson. Shemihaza teaches spells and the cutting of roots. Others teach astrology, the reading of signs in the sky. This isn't generic knowledge, scattered to the wind for anyone to pick up. It's applied knowledge, handed over all at once, with no preparation for whoever received it, with nobody asking whether those human hands already knew what to do with that much power. The text ties the crisis to two movements feeding each other, the transmission of knowledge and the violence born from the Watcher's offspring, the giants. Bodies too large for the world that received them, fed by a hunger the earth had no reserve to sustain. The four archangels carry that collapse before God, asking for direct intervention. They don't ask for an explanation, they ask for it to stop. I chose 3 markers to carry the argument that matters here: the pact, the teachings, the collapse. The Watchers didn't break just any rule among many. They broke the distance between what they knew and what humanity at that moment was prepared to carry. That distance between knowing something and being ready to know it is what most videos about the Watchers never even name. The reading that circulates out there is almost always the same. The Watchers are corrupted guardians, fallen angels who lost the function they once had. That reading mixes together 2 functions the text never treats as equivalent. In this video, I use the word guardian in a very specific functional sense, someone who controls a passage without crossing it. That's exactly what Egypt describes in the funerary texts of the world of the dead, figures who stand still in front of the threshold and decide right there whether passage is allowed. I'll come back to that Egyptian point more carefully in a moment. The Watchers of Enoch never did that. They never guarded anything before the fall. The text describes no earlier guarding function that was later corrupted by the fall. I looked, it isn't there. What the text describes from beginning to end is something else: the decision to cross a border that wasn't theirs, and to hand over on the other side something that should only have been given with preparation. Calling the Watchers corrupted guardians resolves the story too early. It turns transgression into a lapse of duty, as if they were guards who took a bribe at the front gate. In the passages I'm working from here, that reading simply doesn't hold. They didn't stray from a post. They broke a guard they never held. What nobody is connecting is this. Putting Enoch and Egypt side by side doesn't reveal a shared function between the two. It reveals 2 opposite answers to the same question: what to do in front of a limit that protects knowledge capable of transforming whoever receives it, knowledge whose use demands preparation. Before I go on, another short pause. Notice if you're trying to decide too early what this story means. That rush, the urge to close the meaning before its time, is exactly the kind of movement the rest of this video is going to put under examination. The argument about guardians who preserve rather than break needs something concrete to anchor it. It exists documented in the Egyptian funerary texts that describe the crossing of the Duat, the world of the dead. Egyptologist Eric Hornung, in his 1999 study of the Egyptian books of the afterlife, describes successive gates along that crossing, one after another, with no shortcut. The Egyptian funerary texts describe passages guarded by entities tied to specific names, formulas, and knowledge. Wanting to pass isn't enough. The crossing depends on correctly recognizing the order of that threshold, something that has to be learned beforehand, not improvised on the spot. That's the fragment that carries the whole contrast, a system built around the idea that passage requires recognition, knowledge, and preparation, not just desire, not just courage, not just the rush to reach the other side. It isn't the whole case, and I'm not pretending it is. It's a fragment chosen among other possible ones from a much larger body of texts. But it's the kind of structure that keeps reappearing whenever a tradition needs to formalize what it means to be ready for knowledge capable of transforming whoever receives it. There are 2 possible readings of what threshold guardians actually do, and they can't both be right at the same time. One of them has to give. The first, guardian, is a universal function present in every tradition that deals with thresholds, from Egypt to Mesopotamia, in any border myth you've ever heard. The Watchers of Enoch would just be a corrupted version of that function, as if every ancient text about thresholds were, deep down, describing the same thing, only with different outcomes. It's a comfortable reading. It simplifies everything. The second, the one I hold to here, is more uncomfortable. Guardian and transgressor aren't the same function in two different states. They're two opposite answers to the same pressure. In Egypt, the entity guarding the gate of the Duat controls passage. It questions, it demands, it denies when preparation is missing, with no exception I've found. In Enoch, the Watchers do the reverse movement. They break the control and carry knowledge across the border, demanding nothing from whoever receives it on the other side. No question asked before handing it over. Both readings collide in the same case, the same kind of moment, someone receiving knowledge they don't yet know how to carry. If Guardian were just a corrupted function in the Watchers, there should be some trace left, some version of a demand, a test, a partial refusal, however small. In the passages I've worked through, the text shows no process of authorization, no stage of preparation for the recipients, nothing. If guardian and transgressor are opposite answers from the very start, that absence isn't the corruption of a function. It's the complete absence of it, from the pact on Mount Hermon to the last line of the crisis. The common thread between Egypt and Enoch isn't what the two of them guard, because in the end, only one of them actually guards anything. The common thread is what happens when knowledge crosses a limit before the necessary preparation. On one side, that crossing is avoided, delayed, negotiated. On the other, it's carried through to its final consequences, with no break anywhere along the way. That same question, what it means to be prepared to perceive something beyond the ordinary senses, hasn't stayed confined to religious and mythological territory. Modern institutions also tried to investigate perceptions that seem to reach beyond the normal range of the senses. The results remain controversial, and I stay skeptical about most of them. They don't explain watchers, they don't explain a sense of presence, and they shouldn't try to. But they show something small and relevant. The limits of perception have also been investigated outside religious contexts, with a different vocabulary, a different method, a different claim to rigor. I mention it as a research note, not as proof of anything. It's a sideline, not a foundation for what comes next. It only confirms one thing. The question of how far perception reaches doesn't belong to any single tradition. It runs through all of them. Up to this point, the argument has compared two systems, who guards and who transgresses, Egypt and Enoch, gates on one side, watchers on the other. But what that comparison was actually doing is more precise than what it was claiming to do. This video was never about comparing two ancient mythologies that would only be scholarship, archive curiosity. It was, from the very first line, about a question that any system for guarding knowledge is trying to solve in any era. What happens when someone receives knowledge before they have the maturity to use it? Egypt and Enoch were the access to that question, not its destination. Two doors into the same room. One shows what happens when the border is respected, step by step, name by name, formula by formula. The other shows what happens when it simply stops existing. The answer I hold here isn't a fact documented by Hornung, and it isn't a conclusion you can draw from the Book of Gates. It's a reading of mine declared as such. What they still guard, if they guard anything at all, is the threshold of access to knowledge capable of transforming whoever receives it. I need to be exact about this because it's easy to slip. I'm not claiming that the watchers in the text guard anything. The text says exactly the opposite, and I've already shown where. I'm claiming that their story, read through the key I'm proposing, still guards that question left open for whoever wants to pick it up. In the Hermetic reading I'm proposing here, the guardian doesn't exist only to block the passage. For me, the initiatory function of the guardian is subtler than that. It doesn't just ask whether you know the entrance. It asks whether you're prepared for the transformation the crossing provokes. That changes what this video's own title is claiming. They never left isn't one sentence. It's 3 separate claims carrying different weight, and it's worth pulling them apart. In the textual and cultural sense, the sturdiest of the 3, the Watchers never left the religious, apocalyptic, and esoteric imagination. They stayed in circulation for 2,000 years without any real break, and they've come back now with renewed force in places the original texts could never have predicted. In the energetic sense, a hypothesis, never a fact, centuries of attention, fear, and ritual around an image can form or strengthen a collective field associated with it. I have no way to demonstrate that, and I won't pretend I do. I can only name it as a possible energetic reading, one that proves the presence of no entity, specific or otherwise. In the Hermetic sense, an authorial interpretation, explicitly so, the guardian represents a permanent function tied to the limit between knowledge and maturity, present whenever that border exists, in any era, in any tradition. They never left in 3 different senses, one historical, one energetic, one symbolic. These 3 senses don't prove one another, but together they help explain why this image still affects us 2,000 years after it was first written down. And that's why the experience I promised to tell you about, the night I read chapter 6, isn't an emotional illustration dropped into the middle of the argument just to give it a breather. It's the exact place where that permanent function has to be tested in real sensation, not just in theory. I promised to come back to the moment I first read chapter 6 of Enoch. What I haven't explained yet is why my body reacted before my mind processed anything at all. It was a contraction in my solar plexus, not fright, not an emotion I could name in the moment. A physical pressure, localized right there, followed by a feeling of expansion right after, almost as if something had opened in the place where there had only been tightness. I've noticed this kind of signal in my body for years. That was one of the clearest times I've ever registered it. In an energetic reading, one I offer here as hypothesis, never as fact, contraction followed by expansion usually points to contact with something the body recognizes before the mind can name it. I'm not claiming that proves the presence of anything specific. I'm claiming, with all the caution I can gather, that this is what I registered that night. What this description doesn't settle is where the thing my body was recognizing actually came from. I consider 4 categories, and I keep all 4 open to this day: a physiological response, an emotional reaction or suggestion, an environmental perception tied to the space itself or to another consciousness nearby, or an undetermined origin, which is just an honest way of saying, I don't know. I won't pretend I know which of the 4 is the right answer. It would be easier to pick one and move on. What I do know is that they aren't the same thing, and treating them as synonyms is exactly where most people lose the ability to tell what they're actually feeling. This isn't abstract for me. The night I closed the book after chapter 6, I had more than one of these possibilities present at the same time, overlapping, none of them canceling the others out. A real tiredness because it was already late. A real emotional reaction because the text is heavy, and I knew that before I even opened the page. And a quality of attention I didn't recognize as part of my usual state, something more lit up, more alert, for no apparent reason. I didn't decide that night what it was. I still haven't decided. This is what the rest of this video is going to give you. Not the answer to what happened to me that night. Maybe I'll never have that answer, but a way of examining this kind of experience without rushing toward a conclusion that might not even exist. There's no single conclusive test that separates these 4 possibilities in every case. I've accepted that already. What exists at most is a more careful way of asking, and that's what I'm offering now, not as an answer, but as a method, a bingle. I call this practice the threshold listening. It's my own creation, built for this specific purpose, not a technique documented in any of the sources I've used so far. I want that clear before I describe the steps. It's 6 steps plus a 7th that works differently from the others. Record. Describe the sensation without naming the cause yet, not even to yourself. Locate. Notice where it shows up in the body at one specific point or spread across the surrounding space. Contextualize. Note what happened immediately before without editing the list out of embarrassment or because it seems irrelevant. Change one variable, shift position, turn on a light, leave the room, stop reading, or talk to someone, one thing at a time. Compare. Notice whether the sensation lessens, moves, stays the same, or comes back after it had gone. Interpret provisionally. Consider physical, emotional, environmental, intuitive, or paraperceptual responses all at once without closing off the origin too soon. 7th, mobilize and reassess. Direct deliberate attention toward the sensation with breath or intention and watch carefully whether it changes. A change after mobilization doesn't automatically reveal the origin of the sensation. That's the point most people get wrong. It adds one more data point for comparison, not a ready-made answer. If the sensation eased, that could come from energetic mobilization, but it could just as easily come from the breathing, the shift in focus, the relaxation, or the simple expectation that something would ease. Step 7 adds information. It doesn't decide on its own what the sensation was. One warning before anything else. This practice doesn't replace medical or psychological care. If any step causes significant discomfort, stop right there. What threshold listening doesn't promise is certainty. It never did, and it would be dishonest of me to suggest otherwise. What it promises is more data to organize your hypotheses and a real chance to recognize patterns over time. You've arrived at the point this argument was always heading toward since the very first question. What comes now is no longer analysis. That night, I wanted to know what was watching me. Today, I realize that was the wrong question. The first question wasn't who is here. It was what exactly am I perceiving? And the difference between the two is bigger than it looks. That distinction doesn't stay locked to that night or to Enoch. It's the same mistake you make every time you feel a strong certainty and jump straight to what does this mean without first passing through what exactly am I feeling. It happens when a decision seems obvious too fast. It happens when an intuition arrives already wearing a name and you accept the name before examining the intuition itself. It happens at any crossing, yours too, every time a threshold opens and the rush arrives before the discernment does, which, let's be honest, is nearly always. In the reading I'm proposing, the guardian isn't there just to stop you from crossing. It's there to stop you from crossing the same way you arrived, carrying the same rush, the same easy certainties, the same names stuck on too soon. You can walk into your next experience with a clearer question than the one I had that night. That's why this question, what exactly am I perceiving, is worth more than any answer this video could give you about who or what the watchers really were. At the start of this video, I said something never left, and that the mistake maybe was thinking it had to. I still don't know for certain what was present that night I read Enoch 6. It could have been a physiological response, an emotional reaction, an environmental perception, or something I still can't name, maybe never will. The 4 possibilities stay open, and I'm going to let them stay that way. That isn't a weakness in the argument. It's honesty about what the experience actually allows me to claim. But I learned along this path that every threshold protects something, sometimes a place, sometimes a piece of knowledge, sometimes just the part of us that isn't ready to cross yet, and that needs more time than the rush usually allows. Egypt describes guardians who preserve the limit, gate after gate. Enoch describes watchers who cross it all at once without looking back. Literally, Enoch doesn't say the watchers guard a portal, I've already shown that, carefully, more than once. But in this Hermetic reading, their story still guards the question their own failure made inevitable. Who is prepared to receive the knowledge they desire? The story of the Watchers still guards the border between wanting knowledge and being prepared to receive it. That border didn't close when the text ended. It's still open, and you're standing in front of it now, in your own way. The territory is the same one that opened this video. It's you who's standing in a different position inside it now, a little slower, I hope, a little more alert to whatever arrives before its time. If this question reached you, leave one word in the comments: threshold. I'm not asking you to explain it, just to mark that it arrived. If this is the kind of reading you're looking for, literal where the source allows it, authorial where interpretation begins, and honest about the difference between the two, this channel continues right here.